Hey everybody, welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about Lord of the Flies. And for this video, I have the face paint, I'm shirtless, and I made a bow outside. Made a bow outside. This video will be less of a recap of Lord of the Flies and more of an analytical breakdown of it. The point of the book is an exploration of human nature, and with that, we're going to break it down to three topics: Freudian psychology, religion, and social structure. Those three topics have three subtopics, which we'll go into as we explore each topic individually. For Freudian psychology, it breaks down into id, ego, and superego, which we'll explain later on in the video. In religion, it breaks down to God, every person, and devil, and the God is also the Christ-like figure. Those are both interchangeable. And then for social structures, it is anarchy, every person, and laws, rules, and government. In this video, we're going to be looking at key moments and pivotal points in the book, including some small details that fits for each topic, but this won't be a chapter by chapter analysis, as that would take so much time. However, this book is all the information that I know on it, and I will be doing my best to portray it the best I can. So, let's start by showing the chart of our topics and subtopics. And we're going to start at the very top of Freudian psychology. But before we briefly go into the descriptions of the characters, let's see how they got here in the story. The boys arrived on the deserted island after the evacuation plane carrying them to safely during a global war was attacked and crashed. This is similar to how in World War II, the British government ran the Children's Overseas Reception Board, or the CORB, scheme to send British children overseas to safer countries. This included Australia, Canada, and New Zealand to escape the German bombings. However, the scheme was unfortunately terminated in 1940 after the tragic sinking of several ships carrying proved evacuees. This proved that the sea voyage itself was too dangerous. But let's start by introducing the protagonist of the book. The protagonist of Lord of the Flies is Ralph. On the very first line of the first page of the book, Ralph is described as the boy with fair hair, so we can assume pretty well that Ralph is blonde or just has light colored hair. Ralph is an English boy, and he's described as that he might make a boxer as far as width and heaviness of shoulders went, but there was mildness about his mouth and eyes that proclaimed no devil. Ralph is the boy who gathers everyone and is elected leader. So now, off to the next important character, Piggy. Piggy is described as being shorter than Ralph, fat, having glasses, and asthma, but he is smart and rational. And last but not least, we're going to talk about Jack, who's the antagonist of the book. Jack Merridew is a red-haired biggin, who's the main rival of Ralph throughout the book. There's also one more boy, Simon, who's important, but I'm saving him for the religious section of the video. There are multiple other biggins too who are important, for example, Sam and Eric and Roger, but they won't be a super big focus of this video. And the last big group that we're going to be talking about is the Littlins. We're going to mostly talk about them in the social structures part of the video, but they represent the every person. So, to start off this video, we're going to be talking about symbolism. And one of the most symbolic objects in this entire novel is the conch shell. Ralph and Piggy discover the conch shell on the beach at the start of the novel, and they use it to summon the boys together after the crash separates them. Used in this capacity, the conch shell becomes a powerful symbol of civilization and order in the novel. The shell governs the boys' meetings. For the boy who holds the shells, they have the right to speak. And in this regard, the shell is more than a symbol. It's an actual vessel of political legitimacy and democratic power, which would fall under the laws, rules, and government section of the social structure. As the island civilization erodes and the boys descend into savagery, the conch shell loses its power and influence among them. Ralph clutches the shell desperately when he talks about his role in murdering Simon. Later, the other boys ignore Ralph and throw stones at him when he attempts to blow the conch in Jack's camp. The boulder that Roger rolls onto Piggy also crushes the conch shell, signifying the demise of the civilized instinct amongst the boys on the island. Another symbolic, the signal fire, the signal fire, mm, the signal fire is another important symbolic piece of this book. The signal fire burns on the mountain and later on the beach to attract the notice of passing ships that might be able to rescue the boys, and as a result, the signal fire becomes a barometer of the boys' connection to civilization. In the early parts of the novel, the fact that the boys are able to maintain the fire is a sign that they want to be saved. However, as they descend into savagery, Ralph is the only one telling them that they need to keep the fire alive. And the further and further they fall, the less the fire is important. And eventually, it's from Jack Meridew, the hunting is what becomes the main focus rather than just keeping the fire alive, showing their fall from civilization. The signal fire functions as a kind of measurement of the strength of the civilized instinct remaining on the island. And ironically, at the end of the novel, a fire finally summons a ship to the island, but not the signal fire. Instead, it was the fire of savagery. The forest fire Jack's gang starts as part of his quest to hunt and kill Ralph. Another important part of this book is Piggy's glasses. Piggy is the most intellectual and rational boy in the group, and his glasses represent the power of science and intellectual endeavor in society. The symbolic significance is clear from the start of the novel when the boys use Piggy's glasses lenses to focus the sunlight and start a fire. When Jack's hunters raid Ralph's camps and steal the glasses, the savages effectively take the power to make fire, leaving Ralph's group helpless. An extremely important part of this book is something known as the Beast, which we'll explore later. But the Beast is an imaginary thing that frightens all the boys, and it stands for the primal instinct of savagery that exists within all human beings. The boys are afraid of the Beast, but only Simon reaches the realization that they fear the Beast because it exists within each of them. And as the boys grow more savage, their belief in the Beast grows stronger. By the end of the novel, the boys are leaving it sacrifices and treating it as a totemic god. The boys' behavior is what brings the beast into existence, so the more savagely the boys act, the more real the beast becomes. The Lord of the Flies is one of the most important symbols throughout this entire book. Bloody, severed sow's head that Jack impales on a stake in the forest glade as an offering to the beast. The complicated symbol becomes the most important image in the novel when Simon confronts the sow's head in the glade, and it seems to speak to him, telling him that evil lies within every human heart and promising to have some fun with him. The fun foreshadows Simon's death and in the following chapter. In this way, the Lord of the Flies becomes both a physical manifestation of the beast, a symbol of power, of evil, and a kind of Satan figure who invokes the beast within each human being. Looking at the novel in the context of biblical parallels, the Lord of the Flies recalls the devil, just as Simon recalls Jesus. In fact, the name Lord of the Flies is a literal translation of the biblical name Beelzebub, a powerful demon in hell, sometimes thought to be the devil himself. Ralph, Piggy, Jack, Simon, and Roger. Lord of the Flies is an allegorical novel, and many of its characters signify important ideas or themes. Ralph represents order, leadership, and civilization. Piggy represents the scientific and intellectual aspects of civilization. Jack represents the unbridled savagery and the desire for power. Simon represents natural human goodness. And then Roger represents brutality and bloodlust at their most extreme. To the extent that the boys' society resembles a political state, the Littlelands begin the Littlelands might be seen as the common people, while the older boys represent the ruling classes and political leaders. The relationships that develop between the older boys and the younger ones emphasize the older boys' connections to either the civilized or the savage instinct. Civilized boys, like Ralph and Simon, use their power to protect the younger boys and advance the good of the group. Savage boys, like Jack and Roger, use their power to gratify their own desires, treating the littler boys as objects for their own amusement. At the start of the story, Ralph's hair is described as fair, but over time it begins to grow and he mentions wanting a haircut and wanting cleanliness. This progression of hair growing dirtier and longer is symbolic of the gradual descent into savagery and the erosion of social norms. We'll be going more in depth in specific symbols like the Lord of the Flies, and the Beast later on when we get to the parts of religion. So, to start us off, let's go to the top of the chart of Freudian psychology. Let's talk about the subtopics. We have id, ego, and superego. The id is the primitive nature of someone, operating entirely on the pleasure principle. The ego is the rationale. It's a decision making part of the mind that tries to meet the id's demand in realistic social situations. It's the mediator between id and superego. The superego is a moral compass. It's the conscious based on internalized rules and what we think grown ups would make. It's the good things that you want to do, making the right decisions. One of the biggest representations of id throughout the book is Jack Meridew. He is the clearest manifestation of the id. He's driven by primal urges, the desire for power, the thrill of the hunt, and the immediate satisfaction of his violent impulses. Jack's first appearance is as the rigid, uniformed leader of the choir. However, his id surfaces quickly, and in chapter 1, when he's unable to kill the pig, but the inhibition he feels is fleeting. By chapter 3, his guilt went away, and the urge to hunt has completely consumed him. It overrides the communal goal for maintaining the signal fire, which means he's descending further into savagery. And he's described as walking all fours, with his eyes narrow, resembling a predatory animal. His desire to be chief stems purely from a lust for dominance, which is a factor of id. And when he fails to be elected, he compromises by taking command of the hunters, which eventually serves as a foundation for his separate savage tribe. Mask on the hunt. The moment Jack smears his face with clay and charcoal in chapter 4 is a critical turning point. The mask is literally and symbolically a release from the ego and superego. It allows him to shed his civilized identity and fully embrace the primitive id-driven hunter. This is where the killing impulses becomes acceptable between the hunters. For the ego, we're going to look at Ralph. Ralph is the primary representation of ego. He's elected leader not because of his intellect, but because of his size, his attractive appearance, and the symbol of order he holds, the conch. The early ego function between chapters 1 and 3. Ralph's immediate actions are purely ego-driven, focused on long-term survival and reality. He prioritizes rescue and immediately insists on the signal fire. His focus is on the external reality of being stranded and the logical path to rescue. Him and Piggy both represent ego quite well. He used the conch to create order in the assemblies, establishing the fundamental principle of civilization. The rules are the only thing we've got. This is the ego attempting to manage the chaos, and the chaos being the id, with structure, superego, and civilization. Ralph is one of the only one who grasps the tangible need for shelter over the immediate gratification of hunting. He must constantly remind the boys of the necessity of huts. Only him, Simon, and Piggy work together on the hut, while the others, for example the Lillands, go and play, and the rest of the Biggins go and hunt. The internal conflict of the ego happens between chapter 4 and 7. They must constantly struggle against the temptation of the id. Ralph's physical state, like his hair growing long and the filthy, symbolizes his ego losing the battle against instinct. He's repeatedly showing pushing back his hair, a physical action representing his struggle to clear his mind and maintain rational thought, attempting to push away the creeping signs of savagery. Eventually, Ralph becomes attracted to the id. When Ralph participates in the hunt in chapter 7, wow, that was bad. When Ralph participates in the hunt in chapter 7 and wounds the boar, he feels a blissfully dangerous exhilaration. His ego briefly falters, showing that the id represents even the most civilized person. He struggles with the tension between the necessary responsibilities of leadership and the lure of Jack's anarchy. Eventually, we hit the failure of the ego. As the id, also Jack's tribe, grows overwhelming, Ralph's ego begins to shut down. He forgets the purpose of the fire and the shelters becoming baffled and helpless. His despair at the end highlights the ego fragility when faced with overwhelming primal forces and the complete absence of superego support. Now let's talk about superego. The superego is the internalized moral code, or the conscious, which strives for perfection when it's concerned with societal rules and the greater good. It's the voice of the ego that tells it what's right and wrong. For superego, we're going to use Piggy. Piggy is the intellectual, rational voice that embodies the superego. He has no physical power, and he relies entirely on his intelligence and moral authority. Piggy's glasses are a symbol of science, knowledge, and intellectual endeavor, and the tools of superego used to analyze the world. He's the one figure who knows how to light the fire, symbolizing that reason is the foundation of their civilization. In chapter 1 to 11, Piggy's constant question, "What'll the grown-ups think?" is the purest expression of his superego. He's invoking the external moral authority that they have all internalized, and he constantly tries to guide Ralph's ego towards responsible actions. The greater good. When Jack's tribe breaks off, Piggy is full of pride in his contribution to the good of society. By helping build a new fire on the beach, his motivation is always the welfare of the group and the maintenance of the functional, orderly society, which is the core function of the superego. Chapter 11, Piggy's final courageous act is to confront the savages, holding the conch and demanding justice for what they did and what they stole from him. This is the last sign of his superego, before he unfortunately died. Roger rolls the boulder, which shatters the conch and kills Piggy. This moment is the literal and symbolic annihilation of the superego and the total collapse of order, reason, and morality on the island. With the superego destroyed, nothing remains to check the id's reign, leaving Ralph's ego completely exposed and doomed. When Roger pushed the boulder on Piggy, he destroyed the conch, which represents society. When Roger pushed the boulder on Piggy, he killed off superego and laws, rules, and government, as the conch represents social structure. Now let's talk about the devil in the book. The most overt religious symbol of evil is the Lord of the Flies, the severed pig's head impaled on a stake. The name Lord of the Flies is a direct literal translation of the Hebrew name Beelzebub, one of the most powerful demons in Christian theology, often identified with Satan himself. This immediately establishes the pig's head as the physical manifestation of evil on the island. The head is bloody and covered in flies, and represents moral decay and corruption. It is an offering to the supposed beast, but its presence confirms that the true beast is the savage impulses, the id, that has taken over the boys. In chapter 8, the conversation Simon has with the Lord of the Flies is the climax of the devil allegory. The head seems to speak to Simon, but it is actually projecting Simon's internalized fear and knowledge. The Lord of the Flies tells Simon, "Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill. You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you." This message reveals a core theological point. The devil, or evil, is an external force, but an inherent, inescapable part of human nature, the primal id. The devil's power lies in the fact that it resides within every human heart. In fulfilling its promise, the Lord of the Flies promises to have some fun with Simon, which immediately foreshadows his death. This demonstrates the devil's power to destroy the good and reveal the dark, violent nature of humanity. Simon serves as the Christ-like figure, or as a natural spiritual savior who attempts to bring the truth to a doomed people, only to be rejected. Simon has innate goodness. He is set apart by his natural selfless kindness. Like Jesus, he performed quiet miracles of compassion. He helped the little ones retrieve fruit they cannot reach, and he's the only one who worked alongside Ralph and Piggy on the necessary but unpopular task of building shelters. He's free from egoism and savagery that consumes the others. Simon often retreats to his peaceful, beautiful glade in the jungle, a place associated with natural purity. This withdraws parallels to the biblical accounts of Jesus retreating to the wilderness and mountains for prayer and spiritual clarity. But his spot in the glades was eventually ruined when Jack Merridew put the sow's head there. In chapter 9, Simon climbs a mountain to face the supposed beast after the conversation with the Lord of the Flies, and he discovers the dead pilot strapped to the parachute, the truth behind the terrifying phantom that the boys thought was the devil, that the boys thought was the beast. This act of ascending the mountain to gain a saving truth mirrors the actions of prophets and Christ. Simon's descent from the mountain, bearing the good news that the beast is harmless, is his crucial moment as he is his crucial moment. He emerges as the frenzied savage boys are engaged in their rain dance, a primal ritual of the id. They fail to recognize him and brutally kill him. This is a martyrdom, where the truth and goodness are violently rejected by the mankind consumed by fear and sin. His body is then washed out to sea, surrounded by a real, a, a symbolic halo, a circle of light, completing his image as a scared, tragically destroyed figure. There is one little part when he goes up to the parachutes that I want to mention that has really deep symbolic meaning. One moment one moment where we see religion take place is when Simon goes up to the beast, which turns out to be the dead parachutist. His parachute tangled in the wind swayed him forward in a bowing formation. When Simon, our Christ-like figure, approaches the body, which is covered in flies, and the flies represent the devil, it bows forward. The bowing, looking like a prayer, makes the flies fly away, showing that the devil flies away from the prayers. There are other few small hints of the devil throughout the book. When Jack's face turns red, it symbolizes the devil, and the fire, it symbolizes the devil. The first death of the book is when the Mulberry Boy died. Throughout the book, there are three deaths: the Mulberry Boy, Simon, and Piggy. When the Mulberry Boy dies, it's in a fire, which represents hell, and when Simon dies, it's foreseen by Satan or the Lord of the Fly. And his death is a sacrifice akin to how Jesus in the Bible died for the sins of men. After Simon's sacrifice, he's sent out to sea, which is symbolic of heaven, and then Piggy is sent out to sea as well, going to heaven because of Simon's sacrifice. And as Simon's being washed out to sea, he's described as having bright gold hair, which is symbolic of devil, which is symbolic of God and a presence of good. The every person. The Littlums represent the every person. It's the common, easily swayed populace who are the ultimate victims and enablers of the religious and moral fall. The Littlums do not contribute to the essential tasks. They are focused on immediate comfort, like eating fruit and playing, and are easily terrified by the unknown beast, which they call the beastie. They live purely in the present, ruled by their simple id impulses of fear and hunger. Their blind belief in the beast is a metaphor for the mass faith in superstition and fear, which can be easily exploited by figures like Jack. They are the only ones who empower the devil figure, the Lord of the Flies, by their blind acceptance of the idea that evil is tangible, that evil is a tangible external thing. As the story progresses, the Littlins are absorbed into Jack's tribe, happily participating in the feasts and the violent rituals. Their compliance shows how easily the common person abandons civilization morality, and when presented with fear and promise of immediate pleasure, which is the meat and satisfactory under power. I'd also like to add one moment from when Ralph interacts with the Lord of the Flies in chapter 12. When the Lord of the Flies is knocked over by Ralph, its skull is facing the sky and is described as smiling. The Lord of the Flies, or Satan, is smiling because Ralph is overtaken by his primal id, and the Lord of the Flies is looking up to Simon in heaven as he watches his friend succumb to the devil. Now, for the final section of this video, we're going to be talking about laws, rules, government, and the rise and fall of order. This section focuses on the attempt to establish a functioning society represented by Ralph and the conch. The first thing the boys do is establish a form of democratic government. The conch becomes a symbol of law and political legitimacy, granting the right to speak and ensuring order. Ralph is elected based on his nascent democracy. The initial rules, or the speaking orders, and the need for the signal fire, and the rules about using the bathroom are the boys' attempt to impose a rational legal framework on their environment, directly reflecting the civil government they knew. The decline of the legal structure is marked by the growing disrespect for the conch. Jack is the first to directly challenge the conch, claiming the rules are stupid, that his voice should matter more than the law. This destruction of the conch, along with Piggy in Chapter 11, is the official dissolution of the government and law. The rules no longer exist, making the descent into anarchy inevitable. Anarchy is a state of disorder due to the absence of government or authority. This is embodied by Jack's tribe. Jack's tribe is not a democracy, it is a savage dictatorship. Jack governs through fear, charisma, and the promise of immediate gratification, which is the meat and protection from the beast. Jack replaces laws with rituals, the hunting dance and the war paint, which serves to blind the group emotionally and suppress any individual reason or superego. These rituals are tools of oppression. Jack controls the boys by using the concept of the beast as a political tool. By exploiting their fear, he maintains power, showing how quickly a rational society can collapse into a fear-driven authoritarian state. As we established a little bit ago, the Lilians represent the every person, or just the general populace. In terms of social structure, they represent the common person's political apathy and vulnerability. The Lilians largely ignore the rules and fail to attend the meetings. They're too focused on immediate desires, which is eating and playing, to maintain long-term work or civil society, which is keeping the fire going and building structures. The Lilians are easily swayed. They are the first to defect to Jack's tribe because Jack offers them a tangible, immediate benefit, meat and fun, while Raph offers an abstract future benefit, which will be rescue. This illustrates how common people will often choose immediate personal gain over civic responsibility and the greater good. The Lilians are the ultimate victims in the anarchy. They're abused, neglected, and eventually become the enthusiastic participants of the collective id, showing how the lack of law and order can corrupt the populace itself. So, when we take a step back to look at the Lord of the Flies through Freudian psychology, religion, and social structure, we start to see why this book still hits so hard decades later. Golden isn't just telling a story about some boys on an island. He's running an experiment on human nature. Through id, ego, and superego, we watch the mind collapse. Through symbols of Christ and the devil, we watch morality get tested and ultimately destroyed. Through the rise and fall of the conch, we watch civilization itself crumble. Every fire, every argument, every death is golden, showing us that the line between order and chaos is paper thin, and that the beast isn't something out in the jungle, it's something all of us carry inside. This viewpoint is very much related to the philosopher Hobbes, which you could look, as Hobbes and Locke are two of the most famous philosophers and have opposing viewpoint on human nature. And whether you agree or disagree with Golding's view of humanity, the message is clear. Civilization is fragile, morality is a choice, and the real danger begins the moment we stop choosing it. Thanks for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed this video, as the script took me a long time to write. And yeah, thank you for watching.